Hi everyone, Gustaw here. Today I'd like to show you how we can create this additional total label in a small multiple chart. So let's go here to the visualization pane. Let's create a cluster column chart. It can be also done using the line chart. Nevertheless, for the first attempt, let's use the cluster column chart. Our sample measure is going to be the revenues. Now we'd like to add some kind of the breakdown. That's going to be customer. So we will use it as a small multiple breakdown here. Now let's add additional field for our x-axis. It's going to be start of month in that case. So the data will be analyzed in a month regularity. In your case, it can be quarterly, yearly, and so on. Let's go to sort a small multiple by the highest revenue in that case. We skip some part regarding the formatting options, labels, and so on. We just focus on the logic behind this particular solution. So now let's add like the core measure, which is important here. And it's gonna be this one. We'll add it as y-axis field side by side with our revenue. Now let's go here to the formatting pane, to columns. Let's change it to all on the drop-down list. We go to the layout. Let's pick the overlap, because if we are using the cluster column chart, the logic calls for using the 100% overlapped column. So let's change the space between series to 100%. So now you can see that this one edit measure, which brings only the one column on the left side, is now still visible, but it's 100% overlap with other columns. So this is the first step. Then let's pick this additional measure with the single column for each item. And let's change the transparency from whatever we have at the beginning to 100%. So now you can see that this column is not visible. There is also a border which is visible, so we have to take care of it as well. We can change it, for example, to 100% as well. And now you can see that it's disappear on a visual level. So what we can do now is let's go to the general. Let's go to the visual pane, to data labels. Let's assume for the revenues, we might want to change the value, for example, to thousands, let's say. Of course, it can be also like any other format string that is relevant for your analysis. Nevertheless, for this use case, let's pick the thousands. Then we actually can turn that off, because in this particular use case, we don't want to see the revenues labels. So let's turn it off here. And let's now focus on additional measure added, which is this one. So we can see like the one single data label. It's this particular value because it determines what is the maximum value across all of the items, across all of the data periods. This is why this value is coming from. So in that case, we would like to override this measure. So let's go to the value. And now we can see that we have this origin value of this measure. However, we want to change it with our newly created measure. So I'll just bring it, and then I will describe what is the logic behind it. So let's pick the one which is responsible for deriving the given result. So in that case, you can see that we have this items here. It's like the first item, second item, third item of the small multiples, and we can see that we have this additional total label added. And this label is added like from the left side. We can also, if we tweak the measure a little bit, we can also add these totals on the right side. So at the latest available data period, so it will appear above this column, above this column, above this column, and so on. However, taking into account that in many cases we would like to have the title of each small multiple item on the left side, in most cases I prefer also to keep this labels, the added total labels, on the left side. And of course, the entire use case is the most applicable when we actually using the small multiples, because when we are using a different types of charts, like without the small multiple breakdown, it might be just easier and better to add additional labels in the form of the KPI cards, for example, the new cards. We don't necessarily need to have these workarounds. Nevertheless, the small multiples are quite like unique kind of chart. And if we have a lot of items, we might want to, in certain use cases, to add this total label. So that's the one possible way of how we can achieve that. Of course, then we have to tweak the formatting a little bit because we have to add the title, the subtitles, we have to change the legend, and so on. Nevertheless, the logic is as it is already shown. One thing, the additional optional is that we have like the two different fields for the values for our newly created measure. So now we are using the value and it's already concatenated the total value per each item along with the percentage of given total. If we compare this one item with all available other items in the specific filter context. So this is basically, for example, the customer, which is in that case called secure link, is like the 10 percentage of the general structure of the distribution across all of the revenues, across all of these items available in a small multiple. Just wanted to say that we also have this detail section here in the reference label. So we can potentially also leverage that one as well. And if we have like one additional piece of information that we would like to include, we can do this as well. So in that case, we can add, for example, the monthly average. It's not always applicable. It's not always relevant in your use case. Just wanted to mention that we can also leverage the detail section to bring more information into our totals. It can be variance, it can be average, and so on, whatever is important in your case. What is also important is that we have to pick the such grid of the small multiples to actually allow ourselves to have these labels visible. Because, for instance, if we go to the small multiples and if I will start increasing the number of columns, you can see the label become invisible at some point because the canva for each, the space for each small item becomes too narrow. So in that case, the label is not visible. So keep that in mind as well. Nevertheless, that works fine for this, like in that case, 3x3 grid line. And we can also apply that to the line chart. So I will transform this chart from the cluster column chart to the line chart. It requires a little bit of additional tweaking, but let's do it as well. So let's go to the small multiples. Let's sort it by the highest revenue one more time. Now what we can see that, for instance, the reference labels are now in the like multi-layer view. So let's go to the data labels and let's change the layout from the multi-line to the single line as we have in the cluster column chart previously. And one additional thing that I would like to turn off is for this one, I would like to turn off the markers. And I would like also to go to the lines and turn it off and check whether the dot for this particular like first template columns disappear, and it disappears, so it works generally fine. We can now also turn off the legend and it generally works fine. So it can be applied either to cluster column chart with the 100% overlap, or it can be applied to the line chart as well. So now we can just like erase whatever we have here. Of course, it requires further like adjustments in terms of the styling, but it's not so much relevant for our today use case. It's only about adding these totals. So let's quickly check the general logic behind. Before I will actually open the formula for this one, I just wanted to mention that first and foremost, we just have to determine what is like the minimum, the first date across all of these items at the same time. So we don't want to search for the minimum item for each item separately. We just want to define the minimum date across each item at the same time. So in that case, it can be like, for example, the January 2024 or whatever we have the date. Let's check it quickly. Yes, it's actually the January 24, and it's applicable for each item because some of the revenues can be generated for specific items for specific customers, not from the beginning of the year, but maybe from the middle of the year. But for these items, we still want to have these total labels on the left because it makes a little bit more sense if we have these total labels always placed in the same, we always have this like the same placement for each item, even if given items are having the first revenue generated in the middle or just along given periods in a year. So this is the first point. And the second important logic in that case is that we want to bring this additional like the column or the markers only for this first column, only for the minimum dates, not for each element here, but only for the first one, and it has to be a little bit above whatever the maximum value is across all of the items. So we are basically looking for the maximum value across each item. So maybe the cost stream has the highest value, maybe other customer might have the larger value. We have to just find it the customer which had this the most revenues in a given month, and just bring this information as the first goal. So if I, for example, go here and I will change the transparency to 0%, you can still see our like this main column which is added as a first point, which actually determines that both the top ceiling and where it should be like applied from the horizontal perspective, and now it should be on the left side. So let's keep it as transparency 100%. And this measure, for example, is responsible for finding the minimum date and finding the maximum value multiplied by, in that case, arbitrary 1.25. So you can, of course, use a different logic. Maybe the logic should be actually quite similar. Nevertheless, the method of calculating this one can be different, because as usually we have like several different options and approaches how we can tackle the problem. Nevertheless, that one we are just finding the minimum possible date, and we're finding the maximum value across all of the items and multiplied by 125. Of course, respecting the blanks and so on, to only have these total labels at the level we actually want it to be. And we also need at least one additional measure which will bring us these values, because we have to override the origin labels from our small multiple chart with the first one we actually had with another one which can be look, for example, as that one. So we have this, let's say, in the first variable, which is the value, is able to calculate the totals per each item separately. So using this one, we know that the code stream, for example, is 410Ks, and so on. What is the infra for, and so on. The value all allows us to know what is like the total revenues per each items at this, like in total, as a sum of all of these items. We can also have this value percentage, because if we divide the value per given item by the total, we can also achieve that the percentage of total, the distribution. Then we might have the format string for both. So for percentages, an easy case, we just wanted to have the percentages for that one, and for the default, for the currency, we might want like the thousands. We might want to value the base value, whatever is the most instrumental in your use case. For this use case, I just use the 1,000, but it doesn't has to be like that. It has to be adjusted according to your specific use case. And then if like all the checks are met, the conditions are met, and we actually want to display this value, we just like concatenating the default format, which gives us this value, with the pipeline, which is like the small divider. It's optional, of course, and we are concatenating that with the distribution. So of course, the metric you would like to display it as a total is depending on your use case. In our case that we are walking through now is like the value and the percentage side by side, but it can be any other. So the logic stays the same, metrics are changeable and adjustable depending on your use case. So that's basically how it can be done. So for now, it's everything. If you need like any kind of the further clarification, let me know in the comment section. So by that time, have a great day or night, and take care. Bye, to the next one.